My name is Chris and I'll be your host for today. And today I'm joined on the podcast by Pastor Jon Baldwin. Jon is the associate pastor at Riviera Life Church in Torquay. Jon and his wife Sarah joined the leadership team of Riviera Life Church in 2012, with Jon having responsibility for worship and teaching. In September 2019, Jon became the associate leader with the mandate of championing discipleship in the areas of church life, which he is passionate about. Jon also lectures in history and is the lead marker for AOG's Ministers in Training program. Jon loves family time with Sarah and their two young boys, Harry and Jack. He also loves rugby, Lego, and anything history related. Jon, welcome to the pod. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you. Looking forward to talking a bit of history later.
Yes, I'm sure we'll get into history and maybe a bit of Lego as well. I noticed you're a Lego fan.
Yeah, absolutely.
And for those that I don't know whether we'll show this the video, but you're a bit of a Lego buff, and you've got some pretty good Lego structures in the room around you, haven't you? So tell me about a sort of a Lego structure that you've got.
We've got the Avengers Tower. That's
pretty cool.
That's a big one. Lots of Avengers stuff. A load of pirate ships, a few castles, that kind of thing. You know, yeah, good stuff. And I'm just building the Lego Jazz Cafe as well.
Very good. Well, I wonder whether the Lego might well be the metaphor for development for today. We are obviously here to talk about development today, but we're also here to talk about dessert. And so, Jon, I've got to ask you, what is your favorite dessert?
For me, it's no brainer. It's apple crumble. It's with hot custard, because I think there's a bit of a divide amongst a lot of people. If you say what do you like with it, some people go cold custard, some people go ice cream.
Whoa!
But it's hot custard.
Who's saying cold custard?
What people do.
Really?
Some people even say cold custard with ice cream or hot custard with ice cream, don't they? For me,
yes.
It's just apple crumble and hot custard.
Yes. Okay. So no ice cream with it. So
no.
Talk to me about why no ice cream, because a lot of people that have gone for apple crumble on this podcast have specified ice cream with it. Why? What makes them so wrong?
Well, I don't know. I feel like I'm a purist, really. I just crumble, lots and lots of crumble on it all. Lots of hot custard just surrounding the crumble, and I just leave it at that. I just don't want to mix the ice cream and the custard, really.
Fair enough. And then, right, I've got to ask, custard choice is always important. Which custard do you go for?
Ambrosia, I think.
Okay, so kind of a classic. I mean, you are from that sort of area of the world, aren't you? So it's Devonshire, isn't it? It's
Devon.
Yes, so you are in Devon, and that's a proper Devonshire custard. So it's a good choice. We have had people go for bird's custard before. We have some people go for the kind of Madagascan vanilla custard, but
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, it all goes down the hatch. I eat it all, so
well, no,
Atlantic on that.
No, it's a very good choice, a solid choice. Obviously, apple crumble is something that many people have gone for, but to get your kind of nuance on the custard is really important, and the lack of ice cream is good. So yes, an excellent choice there. I think many people will agree that apple crumble and custard is quite the legendary choice. Great. Let's move on. We're going to talk about. We've got 3 resources today to talk about. Should we talk about your first resource? What's the first one you brought with you?
Yeah, brilliant. The first resource I want to talk about is book. It's a classic, really. It's Leading from the Second Chair by Mike Bonham and Roger Patterson. You know, I guess it's written for anybody who finds themselves not in church kind of leadership, not in a senior leader, senior pastor position. Yeah. So you introduced me earlier as, you know, associate leader, associate pastor. And I've been in that role pretty much in Riviera Life Church for the past 13 years. And very, I suppose I'm kind of waving the flag for those in the similar position to myself, although I suppose it's any leadership role that's not the senior leader. So youth pastor, kids pastor, whatever your title is, assistant, executive, whatever. It's that kind of supporting leader. And very often we hear, rightly so, about senior leaders and senior leadership. But I think this role is a real precious and vital role as well. So sometimes it can be seen as one of those kind of transition roles. You're in it for a while before you move on up to maybe a senior leader or something else like that. But actually, some people are called to be that second chair, that associate, and that is absolutely fine. So this is a classic, and I remember someone mentioning this when I was a minister in training many years ago, and I remember picking it up then and having a read through, and more recently again, just kind of refreshing, pouring through it and reflecting on how I've grown in this leadership role as well, and to kind of wave the flag, because in my other role with AOG and marking and ministers in training, that kind of thing, you look across and probably the majority of those who we see ministers in training probably are in a second chair position of some description. And so I think it's really important that we wave the flag for that, and I probably haven't come across too many resources recently that really bespokely cover that kind of role. And so that's why I'm just returning to this kind of classic leading from the second chair.
Okay, great. Well, let's dive into the book. What's some of the sort of takeaways that you've taken from that book? What are some of the things you've learned?
Yeah, I guess as I reflect on my role, and I reflect on as I've been reading the book, you've got to be able to serve someone else's vision. And that can be very trying sometimes when you've got your own ambitions, you've got your own dreams. You've got to be able to complement giftings of maybe the senior leader, those who are in that first chair role, and you've got to build up trust. You've got to build up relationship. It's so important if you're going to have a successful kind of ministry together. You've got to be a listener. You've got to be able to cheer them on. You've got to help navigate their thoughts, their thinking, and their plans. You've got to develop openness and an honesty, and sometimes you've got to navigate as well difficult conversations and situations that arise in church life, and we're all human, and so sometimes you've just got to navigate that, and so this book kind of taps into that. One of the things the book kind of comments on is know where the line is as well, in terms of expectations and between first chair, second chair, that kind of thing. And so as I've been kind of reflecting and reading through the book, it kind of picks up a lot of these themes, and it also speaks, at the end of every chapter to first chair leaders as well, and in how to develop relationships with the second chair and those who they're working with. So it kind of just talks through kind of communication, talks through relationship, talks through roles, that kind of thing. It's in an American context, big church American context. But having said that, a lot of these principles are so transferable. And as I reflect on my journey, I can kind of go, I see that, and when change happens, how to navigate that. And yeah, so those are kind of some of the themes that are coming up in leading from the second chair.
No, that's great. I think this is a really important role. I think, and I think, like you said, that there are many ministers coming through our second chair leaders nowadays, especially with the growth of more multi-site churches, and there's even running a location can be a second chair role. And what are some of those principles that you've started implement? What have you found that you've and that's been really beneficial for you working with your senior leader?
Yeah, I mean, I could give you a tiny bit of a potted history. First of all, I've loved all the leaders that I've worked for. I still do honor them incredibly. For the first 10 years at Riviera Life Church, I was working alongside senior leaders in Jackie Williams in Torquay, and they're 15 years, 20 years above me in terms of age, and so that creates a dynamic, and it takes a while just to build up relationship. It takes a while to build up trust, and you've got to navigate that. You've got to learn about other people. It doesn't that the relationships don't happen overnight. You've really got to work hard at relationships. Knowing your giftings. Okay, so Ian would operate one way, or preach one way, or communicate one way, and absolutely brilliant at what he does. And then I'll come. I'm very much a thinker. I'm very much a planner. I'm very much a teacher in terms of ministry gifting, as well as my profession as well, different things like that. And so it's just knowing where we can complement and what we can do, what skills I can bring to the table, so a lot of worship and developing the worship side of things, knowing that they wanted teachers and someone who could really start working on some discipleship to really complement everything that they're doing. That's one thing that I've been learning. I've been learning a lot about me as well. So maybe I've kind of realized over the years that no, I'm here to serve God, serve the people, serve the church, and unless God calls me out and for something else or another role, I'm here to serve. And so my personal dreams and ambitions, still hold on to them, but you're here to serve the vision of the senior leader and the church. And sometimes that's difficult. It's also learning that sometimes, very often, when we start out in ministry, we're looking for the next step. Very often we're looking for that senior leader position, because that's where it feels maybe that we've got to progress. But actually, your church is growing. Your senior leaders, they need you, they want you, you're vital. Build up a relationship, grow that, because it's so exciting what's happening at Riviera Life Church at the moment. And actually, there is a massive need for second chair leaders. And it's very difficult for me to say this. You almost want your first chair leaders to come on the podcast and talk about the value of second chair leaders. But so I guess over the years I've been through this kind of maybe maturing, maybe not. I'm still growing, but like, actually, I'm here for a reason, season to serve, to love. I've got my own expression, my own leadership giftings and callings, which are recognised, and feel quite at home. There's no pressure, good relationships, and all that kind of stuff. So that's just a few things that I've been working on and mulling over the years.
Yeah, great. Well, I think it is a vitally important skill to learn, and I think we sometimes think that the wrong thing to think would be that the senior leader has to have all the skill sets. They've got to be the great communicator and the planner, and they've got to be the relational person. They've got to have everything. Of course, that's completely untrue, because no one person can have all the skill sets. And so that second chair leader has to come in and be very complementary to the skills that the senior leader doesn't have, and that's actually a real strength. So you complement each other. I've learned a lot recently. It's a business podcast, but it's called the Second in Command podcast. Very similar. It speaks to the kind of COO roles in business, but very, very similar. Lots of sort of transferable skills and principles there. And recognizing that there is this complementary nature to the first chair leader and the second chair leader. And so I think for anyone that's in that role, any minister that's in a second chair, firstly, it's to say that like God has brought you into that role, and to not and not despise it because you want to be a senior leader, but actually there's a calling there, but to learn how to complement the senior leader well, I think is important.
It's really important. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, we had a transition of leadership, and Jordan and Naomi Williams became the senior leaders. And they're 15 years younger than me, and all of a sudden, in terms of like, I'm the elder one in that relationship, and so the dynamic changes again. You've got to learn how to change a dynamic. We've got a good relationship where we're great friends, but even within that, it's okay knowing where the line is, knowing when your senior leader is the boss and has to do those kind of things, but knowing when there's friendship, relationship, openness, and all that kind of stuff. You've got to craft it. You've got to work at it. And I've been blessed, in the role that I am. And we're really developing, and we have done over the years, is develop a real good team ethic, and it's a joy. It's a joy, even in the difficult times, the hard times which happen, to be part of a team like this, have senior leaders, have second chair leaders, all working together in unity. It's really refreshing. And God, where there's unity, God commands the blessing, right? So,
Yep.
So it's been, it's a really important role.
Fantastic. Okay, that is leading from the second chair by Mike Bonham and Roger Patterson. Should we go on to your second resource? What's the second one you got?
Brilliant, Chris. The second resource, it's a podcast. So we're going to talk podcasts from now on. I guess, first of all, I'd make a comment about podcasts. They're my new form. They have been my new form of reading, I suppose. Every time I'm in the car or at the gym or whatever, I still read books, love reading books, but it's easier sometimes to have the podcasts on or the talking books or whatever. So the second podcast is the Resilient Pastor podcast. It's kind of American based, produced by the Barna Group in America, and it's hosted by Glenn Packham, Rich Villadas, and Sharon Hodder Miller. And and the kind of the tagline is the challenges of leading church in a rapidly changing world. Okay. And yes, again, it has an American perspective. But again, there's so much that is transferable. And it's like, like this podcast where you're just listening, you're talking, you're hearing different leaders just speak and converse about different things. A lot of the themes they talk about in this podcast, discipleship, church leadership, spiritual formation, all transferable things. Oh man, that's really useful. And so there's been a few episodes recently that I've been really encouraged by, and I've turned to them in terms of what we're preaching in church and all that kind of stuff, just to kind of get perspectives, just to kind of get a different view, a different perspective on things. So yeah, so it's a brilliant podcast.
Right. Well, should we dive into one of those episodes? Tell me about one of the episodes that's been really sort of impactful for you recently. What did you learn from it?
Okay, so for example, in our recent teaching series at church, we've done a series called Strong Beliefs and Courageous Conversations. Okay, it's kind of those big elephant in the room topics that the church needs to speak out about. But if you step out, you could receive some fire as well. But you still got to step out and speak out about some of the topics. And so two of the topics, I'll take two of the topics that we've just taught on recently, race and discrimination and engaging in politics. And with race and discrimination, I remember just going through the Resilient podcast episode guide and kind of going, are they going to talk about this? Because they do talk about these these issues on this podcast. And I went back to about 3 years, about the time of the Black Lives Movement, and when all that was happening about 3 years ago. And they were interviewing a bit like this. They were interviewing a Pastor Derwin Gray, sorry, and who's written on this subject, who speaks on this subject, has a multi-ethnic church. And so it was a joy, first of all, just to listen in on this conversation. Yeah, admittedly a different context, but if we go back to our 2 or 3 years ago in our churches, the BLM movement, everything that was going on, it was really impacting even here, even in Torquay where I am. People say, it's generally in terms of the demographic, white middle class, but in our church, we did a count the other not so long ago. We've got over 15 different nations represented, which is absolutely amazing, and it's absolutely beautiful from all across the world, and some big numbers in terms of Filipinos, people from Nigeria and Eastern Europe, and it's so special. It's the family of God, right? But many of these people in our congregation would have been affected by what they seen and hear in the news in America, and even in Britain sometimes when it's all going mad. And we've got to be able to speak about race and discrimination confidently. And so just here doing great, kind of listening on the conversation, make some notes, take some quotes, and just like, oh, that's a real good perspective, especially when we're trying to say, what does the Bible say about these issues, and how, and so that was really, really helpful. And then he mentioned another podcast and another resource in the podcast I was listening to, and I followed that up, and I went down that road. So the historian, the researcher in me is kind of like, okay, that's really helpful. So now I'm going to go and explore that. I'm going to go and explore that. So listening to these podcasts opens up very often another world of kind of, oh, there's even more information there, and all that kind of stuff. So that was really powerful, really helpful in just navigating that. So our youth pastor Gabe and senior leader Jordan had an interview, and I just came off the back of this interview and just brought 15 minutes on what the Bible says about, and how we navigate race and discrimination, how we celebrate race and all that kind of stuff. And it was a very powerful and beautiful kind of session that we had with our church. That was certainly one of the topics recently.
Yeah, I love how podcasts are this great medium that can really help you think theologically through specific topics and really dive into something. Because especially, the length, they tend to be not, they're shorter than a book, but they can be anywhere from 15 minutes to, I think the longest podcast I listened to was about 2.5 hours. And so, but you can really get into a great deal of detail on one specific topic. And I think they're really, really helpful. So a podcast like this is always good. And I think it's always good to have a few favorite podcasts that you're listening to, because it gives you some quick information across different areas, I think.
Completely. So yeah, that's on my playlist. And another topic in that we've been preaching on, and it's so relevant. I preached the week before on engaging in politics, and it was a week before the general election here, and it was kind of interesting to navigate, because people in the church were kind of going, how's he going to navigate this? Non-partisan. But it's a week before the election. How do we conduct ourselves as Christians? What does the Bible say? And again, I used the Resilient Pastor, because they've got some episodes on engaging in politics, some other podcasts as well. And it's even more so in America right now, as we all know. It's very split, and obviously Christianity and religion kind of feature far more heavily in American politics than maybe they do in Britain. And it must be very difficult to kind of, who do I vote for? On one hand, there's this, and on the other hand, there's this. And so having these podcasts and these conversations of godly people who are, kind of saying, how do we vote, and what should we do, and what does the Bible say? Really, really helpful, because I know at the end of my sermon, when I did engaging in politics, I gave a load of resources out to the church. Some of them had been recommended by Assemblies of God. Others I'd researched myself, just good resources to help people make informed decisions. And I think that's really, really important. And people were really, really grateful for what we were able to do on that Sunday.
Yeah, I remember having a think through about the sort of political side of things, and I think traditionally churches have been a little bit apolitical, been wanting to sort of stay away from the conversation and say, look, we don't want to get involved, because worried about becoming partisan. But I think and the more I've looked into it, the more I've realized that the gospel is political, but it's not partisan.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
so,
Jesus would say that, about pay taxes to Caesar, for example. He's not saying don't. He's not saying rebel. He's not saying anything like that.
Yes, absolutely. So it does get involved in that area. I think probably one of my favorite quotes would be Tim Keller, who talks about how in the Christian has to agree on some things with the right and in some things with the left, and actually it's finding this the way of Christ is to find this way through, which is completely different from being partisan. And I found that really sort of encouraging and fascinating. Obviously, it means that we have to do a lot of work, we've got to think theologically through every single one and then make informed choices on it.
Completely. So that's where we went there. So I found like the Resilient Pastor podcast, just on these two issues alone, really, really helpful. But it covers a whole range, and I'd encourage people to have a listen.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, that's the Resilient Pastor podcast. Great recommendation there. Should we move on to your third resource? What's the third one?
Brilliant, Chris. Well, the third resource, we can talk about one resource or a few attached ones. It's basically, I'm going secular, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but the Rest is Politics podcast is one in particular, but there's a whole series of the Rest is. So there's the Rest is Politics USA, the Rest is History as well. I think there's the Rest is Football as well. I don't really listen to that one, but the Rest is Politics and the Rest is History in particular are great podcasts that I've been listening to. Great.
Well, let's dive into. We can go into either one of them. I listen to both of these, so I can happily talk about these probably all day long. Let's talk about the Rest is Politics. What intrigues you about the Rest is Politics? Why do you like listening to it?
First of all, as you said in the intro earlier, I'm bivocational as a minister. So I've always been teaching in either secondary school or further education in college at degree level. I'm now teaching in an alternative provision college. And just for 2 days, just to complement my ministry and what I'm doing with the church. But my specialism is history and politics. So I've taught, all the way through secondary school history, A-level history. I've taught and ran a degree course at the University of Plymouth where I taught like subjects like the Reformation, different things like that. So I'm a bit of a history geek. Absolutely love history, but you can't escape history without doing politics as well. So very often I've been brought in to teach politics, A-level politics, different things like that. And I'm a bit of a geek. I enjoy it. I enjoy watching, reading, taking it all in. And so when these podcasts and there's other podcasts very similar as well started coming out, I kind of gobbled them up, really, being a history enthusiast and a politics enthusiast as well. So there's a tiny bit, and I suppose why and how is this relevant? It's not just about me geeking out. I think let's talk of Rest is Politics. We're living in, and we have been for some time in this country and across the world. We've intimated that with the last podcast we just mentioned. Politically interesting times, let's put it that way. I think this year alone, for example, over 60 countries in the world have an election of some description. That could mean that the balance of power shifts completely. We just had our own election, and whilst the rough and tumble of the election feels rather undignified, to see both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer reach across the aisle, shake hands, and be cordial and dignified with each other, it is really, really pleasing to see. But that's not the case everywhere in all facets of political life. There's a lot going on in the world, a lot globally, in terms of politics. And I just really feel that Christians need to be politically aware. Christian leaders need to know what's happening in the politics in their own country, politics around the world, not to necessarily side, but to be informed. And also, it also shows us some of the big things that we need to pray for. Whether that's leaders, whether that's policies, whether that's laws, whether that's making a difference, whatever. I think Christian leaders everywhere need to be more politically informed and engaged as well. Like where we're reaching out to local MPs and local councillors, where we're making petitions or having interviews with members of parliament, or going to Westminster and just taking this kind of interest and making a difference in the process as well. So that's why I'm kind of really plugging these kind of podcasts, because I just think it's really essential. What's going on in the world at the moment, without getting into politics, you've got Israel, Gaza, you've got Ukraine, Russia, you've got China stuff. You've got massive things happening in America at the moment. And at the time of recording, Joe Biden has just passed the candidacy on to Kamala Harris, who will be the next, who will go for the presidency, facing off against Donald Trump in November. And and I don't think that story's ended yet either. So we just got to be aware, informed, and be very prayerful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I really like about this podcast is, so you got to have the two hosts are Rory Stewart, who was former MP. I think he was a cabinet minister as well with the Conservative Party. Right. So he sort of skews, but both hosts are very sort of centrist. And so Rory Stewart skews slightly centre right. Yeah. And then they have Alistair Campbell, who was the advisor to Tony Blair. Yeah. And he skews sort of slightly left of centre. And so what you've got is you've got two hosts that are really from different parties, sort of talking across the divide, and actually looking at things in a very, very civilized manner. The one thing I really sort of, I get put off with politics is the kind of the shouting and the rhetoric and all that kind of stuff. Whereas this is very much a thought through podcast.
What's their phrase? They say, I'm just thinking off the top of my head. They can disagree agreeably. And that's okay. And I told that to the congregation the other day when I was preaching. It's okay to have differences of opinion. It's just how we conduct ourselves in that,
Yes, absolutely. And so, and the other thing I like about the podcast is it really they should sort of show the behind the curtain of politics a little bit about what it's like to be a minister, what it's like to be in government, what actually they'll be thinking through when they're going through these decisions. And actually, I think it gives you a bit more of an appreciation for what politicians actually do, and actually the difficulty in that job. And I think remember Rory Stewart saying he had 7 different jobs in 9 years or something like that. It was crazy amount of jobs. And
you're managing people, you're managing expectations. You've got to serve your constituency. You've got to serve the party. If you're on cabinet, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of people say don't do politics, don't like politicians. They're real people who are just who in the main have just stepped up and to make a difference. And I believe the majority of politicians want to make a genuine difference, whatever side of the aisle they sit on, for people, for the country, and we've got to pray for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also talked about the Rest is History podcast. I know obviously you're a history aficionado yourself. Talk to me about that podcast. I listen to it as well. It's kind of podcast I listen to whilst I'm at the gym. So talk to me about that one. What do you love about it? How does it help you?
Well, again, I think the hosts are Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland, not Spider-Man Tom Holland.
No, important.
Yeah. Historian Tom Holland, great recognised historians in their own right, and the Rest is History. They cover every topic almost under the sun. Some random ones, some well-known ones, all that kind of stuff. Again, it's in this lovely conversational way. It's deeply researched, and again, let's talk about. Loving history. People used to say to me, and I get it all the time, oh, I didn't used to like history, John. History's boring. History teachers, blah, blah, blah. I get all that. But I really do believe to understand where we've come from helps us to understand our present, helps us to, kind of like predict what could happen in the future. I know that sounds all very cliche, but it's really, really important. One of the a series of episodes they did a while back, they did a whole series, and I absolutely gobbled it up, on the Reformation, about like 6 weeks on Martin Luther and the Reformation. And I just thought it was brilliant. It was a brilliant overview. It was a masterclass. The detail, the research. So for any minister who's interested in kind of church history, I'm always fascinated in how did we arrive here when we were all Catholic, like 600 years ago, and and how the kind of like everything's kind of split. You've got the Reformation, and then even within Protestantism, of course, the branches have just spread out everywhere. So how do we get here? It's absolutely fascinating. So that podcast was good. Sometimes they will kind of do historical figures as well, or whatever, and within that you just learn something about the past that does shape the now and the present and the future. And it's brilliant.
Great. Yeah, I really like it, and I really enjoyed the series on the Reformation as well. Really enlightening. I think really helpful for any minister to know where we've come from, how we've got to where we are, and how the Reformation contributed to that very significantly. And I think we think, oh, we know what happened, but actually to really dive into the detail is really helpful.
There's a lot more. People really fought for what they believed in. And and oh wow, it just didn't happen. Nothing ever happens. Sadly, there's a lot of warfare as well. Sadly, over things, and you wish things could be different, but that's what's happened, and we've got to learn from that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there are two excellent podcasts there, and actually, four great resources there. So we've the resources say Leading from the Second Chair by Mike Bonham and Roger Patterson. The Resilient Pastor podcast, and then The Rest is History, or The Rest is Politics podcasts. So 4 great resources there. John, thank you so much for taking the time today to talk through those. Really fascinating, and I'm sure we could talk for hours on all 3 of those things. I think the main thing is for anyone listening to this is just to dive into them, get the book, the Leading from the Second Chair, listen to those podcasts, because I think they're really developmental and will really help any minister, whether you're teaching, whether it's just helping you work out what you believe and helping you think through things so that you can better help your church. So John, thank you so much for joining me today, and I'm sure I'll see you again soon for another podcast, but for today, thank you so much for joining me.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.